Hey everyone, Simon and Anthony here again with the How to Carnivore podcast. And it's the first one we've filmed for a little while. So, Anthony, welcome back. How are you?
Hey, good man. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thanks. Good to be chatting again.
Yeah.
The topic for today is epilepsy, which we know can certainly be helped or completely omitted or gotten rid of with a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, which is even more effective. So I'm wondering if you might be able to start off by explaining what epilepsy is.
Yeah. So epilepsy is a medical condition where just essentially people are just more predisposed to having seizures. So they'll have chronic seizures, and without medication or intervention of some form or another, they'll just continue to have seizures. And once you have a seizure, you are more predisposed to having further seizures. Specifically, a seizure is overexcitation of your neurons, either in a focal area or broadly across your whole brain. And they present in different ways. So a focal seizure in a certain area, maybe you'll have like little muscle twitches. So your arm's sort of shaking and you're looking at it going like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. And you can't necessarily stop it. And so just little twitches, or even just facial twitches, or your face is just twitching and twitching and twitching. That could be a facial, like a focal seizure as well. I mean, it could also be, low calcium and getting little, areas.
Or like even like maybe muscle fatigue. Is it sort of sounds similar to? Is it kind of like a cramp then?
It wouldn't well. So maybe you could get like the facial twitches, which could be similar to cramps, but they're more like spasms that you would get like with low calcium. Yeah, you can certainly have that. That's just muscular, just something is going on with the muscle and it's just sort of twitching. But this would be a little different, that you're just moving and you can't stop your body from moving, and it's just moving on its own constantly. That could be a seizure. Then you have other things like temporal lobe seizures. You could have those manifest in different ways, where you're actually experiencing different sort of sensations and environment and different sounds and smells and everything like that are not really happening. You're experiencing things in a slightly different way. So then you get you can get other ones that are like what's called an absent seizure or petit mal seizure, where it's like a blank staring episode, and the person's unconscious, but they're just sitting there and they don't really move. They don't slump over or anything like that. But consciously, they're not there. They just sort of blank out. And so you'll try to get their attention. You're like, what's going on? And they're just sitting there staring. And it's a bit scary if you were to find a loved one like that and you didn't know what was going on. And it's also scary for them because they can be aware that they're losing track of time. So if you have someone, if you have a group of people and people sort of sitting there and you were to experience that, well, maybe you would be unconscious essentially for a couple of minutes or a few seconds or whatever, but maybe something's different. Maybe people are talking about a different topic or sitting in different places, and you just went, whoa, you were sitting there and you were sitting there, and then Billy's gone. Like, what's going on? And they'll tell you that, like, oh yeah, no, Billy got up to do this, and then we switched because of that, and blah blah blah. And you're realizing, like, I missed all of that. Like, where was I? And that can be a sign that you're having some of these staring episodes. Then there's the grand mal seizures, the tonic-clonic seizures that people are more familiar with, where your entire body is completely rigid, you're shaking and you're arching your back, and you bite your tongue, and you can damage yourself. You can fall. Obviously, a big risk of seizures is that if you're driving or you're on a ladder or even just walking around, you will clench up and you will fall, or you will crash, or you will come off a ladder, and you can seriously harm yourself. That's why it's a law in Australia and in the US that if you have a seizure, you can't legally drive for a certain period of time. It's usually 6 months, seizure free. And that's because if you were to have a seizure while driving a car, that would be very, very dangerous. Like, there's a high chance of someone dying, you and other people. So it's very dangerous. But I always advise people that the reason that it's the law that you can't drive is because of that risk. But you should also take that principle home with you in other things and just think about them, because if you're and think about it, it's like, if I were to have a seizure right now, would that end really badly?
Yeah.
You know, if you're driving a car and you're having a seizure, would that end really badly? Yes.
Climbing a ladder, like you said, like,
Yeah, exactly. Climbing a ladder, swimming in the ocean.
yeah,
You
true.
know, you're going to sink down in a swimming pool with other people. You sink down. Well, you know, maybe someone might be able to help you. If you're in the ocean and it's murky, probably not, you know? And so, even a pool, I mean, that would probably a bad idea.
Yeah.
But certainly alone it would be. And so all these things, you know, going up on the roof to clean the gutters, you know, that would end badly. And so it's that principle is that if you have a seizure, then you're in trouble. And again, so one seizure can beget more seizures. So if you were to have a seizure, that will predispose you to having more seizures. And so it's really important to sort of get on top of those.
Why is that?
You know, you're just, I don't know fully. I don't know if that's perfectly understood, but it's probably to do with you're sort of electrically priming yourself to have these things. And so you're you know, triggering something in your brain. You're having this big, basically overexcitation and you know, sort of electric currents are changing in your brain as well. And that could make it easier for you to get back in that state again in the future. Just like if you get hit by lightning, you actually charge yourself in a way that you're more likely to be hit by lightning in the future. And so I sort of think of it like that, but that may not be an actual accurate description physiologically, but that's sort of the way I think about it.
That's kind of interesting. I didn't realize you were actually more likely if you've been hit by lightning once.
Oh yeah. Well, that's what they say. You know, it's like, oh, it's not going to strike twice or something like that. Actually,
likely to even striking once. Yeah.
I think it was it Chichi Rodriguez or something like that? Maybe I'm getting the name wrong, but it was a golfer. He was a pro golfer, and he got hit by lightning on the golf course, and then he was out again. He got hit again.
Oh man!
So like anytime the clouds roll in, he's like, "Yep, screw it," and he just tosses clubs like, "Yep, I'm out. Nope, not doing that again." And he just gets out of there because he's just like this, you know, he's like a lightning rod out there.
Literal lightning rod. Oh man, that's funny.
So that's what epilepsy is, and obviously, you know, seizures are very, very hard to deal with. They're very difficult. They're hard on your body. They can be fatal, even without falling or crashing your car. Seizure can kill you. And so if that's not reversed, you go into what's called status epilepticus, where you're not able to get out of a seizure. And, you know, and unless you are given a lot of different drugs, it's, you know, you can die from that. The longer you're in a seizure and having like a little grand mal tonic-clonic seizure, the harder it is for your body to stop naturally. So you get over 5 minutes, basically, it's going to be difficult. It's less and less likely that you're going to stop that on your own, that you'll need intervention with medications. Yeah, I think it'd be very simple. You know, that's actually one of the ways, you know, I mentioned hemlock, you know, the North American, I think it's like water hemlock, is one of the most dangerous plants in the world, and certainly in North America. And how that kills you is it just trashes your brain. It's just like a neurotoxin, and it puts you into seizures, and you have such outrageous seizures that you will die in a couple of minutes from the seizures that it gives you.
Shit. So outside of hemlock, do we know what's causing seizures or epilepsy?
So, you know, I think that's going to be multifactorial, because you can have a lot of different causes of seizures. You can have, you know, brain injuries. That's the number one risk factor for developing epilepsy is trauma, traumatic brain injury. Also having like a lesion. So if you have like a tumor or either cancer or benign in your brain that's causing pressure, that can sort of, you know, trip up the normal workings of your brain and predispose you, or at least increase your risk of having seizures. And you know, having a bleed or all these sorts of things, these all do that. This is why when someone comes in, they have an extreme insult to their brain, either from injury or from tumors, we put people on anti-epileptic medication, even if they haven't had a seizure. Or if we do brain surgery and we're cutting into the brain, we will put them on seizure prophylaxis, usually for about a week. Usually that's enough. That, you know, you're at more risk at the beginning of that, and that, you know, exponentially decreases as you go. And so after about a week or so, you're, you know, pretty good odds to be out of that window. So there are a lot of things that can cause that. But, just people just having epilepsy all on their own, there could be, genetic issues, there could be structural issues, they could have had an injury or an insult. But, one of the interesting things is that food certainly affects this. Now we know about, the hemlock that causes seizures. Well, that, who's to say there aren't other things in plants and different toxins that will cause that as well. We certainly know that there are a lot of neurotoxins out there that have been developed over, millions and hundreds of millions of years to stop insects and animals from eating these plants. And they were designed in order to do that. And maybe they were designed to, ward off an insect, and we're not an insect, so it doesn't quite work like that with us. But, things like caffeine, I've spoken to people with epilepsy, and they've said that has been a big trigger for them is caffeine, and they sort of think of caffeine as a neurotoxin. And so, and we do know that a ketogenic diet has actually been used clinically for roughly 90 years to treat epilepsy. And it's actually still very effective, and it's still used in top centers such as Johns Hopkins. I was reading a study about them. They've had, a number of publications over the years where they're just saying like, yeah, this is actually still a good treatment modality. We still use this. Here's a case series of people, and these are the benefits that they got from that.
Is that's an Australian hospital, right?
Johns Hopkins, no, that's in Baltimore. That's America. So that's one of the top hospitals, and was one of the top universities, medical schools, and hospitals in the world. And so that's
me having no idea, but yeah, because it was familiar. No, I was like, is that Australian? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, and they're one of the top, neurological centers, and certainly neurosurgical centers. That they would absolutely be, if not number one, the number one neurosurgical center, pretty close to it. That's where people like Ben Carson, who was the first neurosurgeon to successfully separate conjoined twins at the head.
Wow.
That's where he was. He was head of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins for decades, and he was just, really, probably the most famous neurosurgeon of his time, and deservedly so. And a very interesting guy, has a very interesting backstory. He's written a number of books on that. He even had a movie made about him with Cuba Gooding Jr. Cuba Gooding Jr. played him in his life story, which is pretty badass. And it's called Gifted Hands. It's a very, very, it's probably one of the more inspirational stories you'll ever see. Someone coming from extreme poverty and extreme conditions in a very rough area of Detroit, and just working it as just working his ass off and getting into Yale on a scholarship. I believe he was on a scholarship, and then I don't think he would have been able to pay for it otherwise, because he did come from very humble means. But and then gone into Yale medical school, and then accepted into Johns Hopkins neurosurgical program, and he was so good that when he finished his residency program, they made him head of pediatric neurosurgery. And like, straight away, and so like that doesn't happen. It's I believe it was straight away. I believe it was just, I think he was like 32.
I gotta see this movie now.
So, yeah, check it out. Yeah, no, it's good. And so that's really one of the top centers, and they use this. It is surprising to me that more neurologists aren't using this, at least as like a first line. Now, if someone can't stick to it, and I've spoken to people like, well, yes, we do know it actually has, very good evidence for it, and it's very helpful in seizures, but people like carbs, and so they want to do it. And I think that's kind of giving up. I think you should at least try, because, something works, and it's not a bunch of heavy medications that are going to have all their own side effects.
Totally. And also you're a doctor, and a patient see you, like, they'd probably take you seriously. So give them the best advice you've got.
Yeah.
Don't just assume that they're going to go for donuts instead of eating meat when you haven't even given it a try. Most people really trust their doctor, particularly when they're in a vulnerable position like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, and that's why I always, have a lot of regard and respect when I'm for people when I'm speaking to them, because they are, hurt and they're scared and they're worried and they need help. And so, you have to have that frame of mind that that's why these people are coming to you. And so, it just helps you take that as seriously as you should. And you're right, people do listen. When I see people that have been having seizures, in the brain surgery setting, they've just had seizures since this sort of thing happened. I just sort of, I will mention it, and I was like, oh, actually, this has been shown for decades that this is really helpful. And they're like, really? Like, wow, that would be great. And some of them try it and they have great results. And I've had a number of people contact me, based on that, and mentioning that in other talks, and them trying it, or maybe just coming across it on their own, and then saying like, wow, actually, I've really, I had that same experience. Like, I'm off all my medications, and I was on like 5 different medications, and I was just still having seizures, and then I went ketogenic, and like I was able to come off most of my medications, and I was able to control it with far fewer. And then they went carnivore, and then they really got rid of everything. And at least for these people, they have not had seizures since then. I'm not saying that will happen for everyone, and sort of lesional seizures, like something like you have a tumor there pushing on things, that you may still have issues with that, but it'll certainly reduce them and make them far better to control. Absolutely, I have no qualm saying that definitively. And some things, like temporal lobe epilepsy, where you have this nidus of tissue that's just freaking out for some reason, and that's sparking these seizures. I don't think it's as effective for them, but that's ketogenic. There's no
Temporal
studies.
lobe. Which part of your brain is the temporal lobe?
Right there. But that's right there. Yeah. So that's your sort of your temporal bones in there, but that's where we would call this like the temporalis muscle. So we call this your temple.
Yeah.
Right?
Very sensitive.
And so you have the temporalis muscle there, which is makes you clench your jaw. Yeah. There's a lot of bones there that meet of different. There's like sort of suture lines where like the different frontal bone, temporal bone, parietal bone, they all sort of meet right there, and it's thinner. And because these are where bones are meeting and knitting together, it's sort of a weak spot. It's like a crease or whatever. I'm blanking on the seam. And so it's going to be a little weaker. And there's like a big artery that runs behind there. And it's like, it's just, if you were thinking about how to design a person worse, like you probably couldn't come up with too many worse places to like put that little artery. And so you get a knock there and it's weaker. And so it kind of fractures in and just slices that artery there. And so you get this is why the advice is that if you have a bad head injury, especially if you lose consciousness, or get a concussion or whatever, that you shouldn't go to sleep for 8 hours, is because if you've cracked that bone and that sort of sheared that vessel, then it's going to present sort of in the next 8 hours, because it's an arterial bleed, and it's going to start putting pressure in your brain, and it is high pressure because it's coming from the artery. So you're going to see it fast. And so you shouldn't go to sleep, because you need someone there to monitor you to see if you start going goofy, and see if you start slipping into a coma because of the pressure on your brain. And if you're already asleep, they're like, oh, they're just sleeping, they're comfortable. And then you try to wake them up in the morning, and they're not waking up, they're in a coma. So that's why, specifically, if you get hit in the temple and you get bad injury there, or knocked out or whatever, that's the danger thing. If you get hit in other parts of the head, probably still good advice to just stay awake for a while and have someone keep an eye on you so you don't start getting goofy. But that's specifically what it is. It's specifically for an injury right there above the temporal lobe.
Yeah. I mean, you can just feel in your own head, like so much stronger in the forehead, or even the back of the head. I know whiplash is terrible, but at least it feels like it's less likely to crack anything.
Well, it is much thicker, and when you're cutting through the skull to access the brain, there are just areas of the skull that are just thicker, and this is a very thin part. And so we actually access this. It's called the keyhole, is going right there, because you sort of go there. That's the key to several different areas and fossa in the brain, or in the skull, that you can access different areas of the brain, and even the eye. And so that right there, when you're sort of drilling that down, I mean, it's a couple millimeters. over there. So that bone's very, very thin, a couple millimeters thick. And then you go over here and, it can be like a centimeter, and then other people, people from, like sub-Saharan Africa or Aboriginal Australians, their skulls are much thicker, much thicker. And so when you're doing surgery on these and you're trying to do a burr hole and you're trying to get in there, sometimes we have these craniotomes that sort of drill out an area. So you drill a little hole and then you stick this saw in there and you can sort of, drill it out.
That's insane.
Take off a bony flap. Yeah. So I've seen guys that have their skulls are thick enough that we can't actually use the craniotome. Like it won't work. It's so thick. And so it takes a lot longer to get that piece of bone off. And, when you're working on a time crunch, they've got this big bleed or pressure or something like that. Like, it gets a bit anxious because you're like, "Ooh, shoot, this is taking longer than I wanted to," And
but I reckon I could do with a bit more thickness in my skull. Like I've had a few concussions, and I reckon if it was twice as thick, it just wouldn't have been such an issue,
Well, the thing is too is that like the skull is one part of it, but also it's just your brain sitting in cerebrospinal fluid and it's just sort of floating there, right? And so if you get a knock, even just like like shaking baby syndrome, you're shaking that around, that's going to damage the brain. And so you bang your head. The problem is not that your skull has let you down and shattered in and smashed into your brain. It's that you've hit with such force and now your brain is rattling around in your skull and it's smacking against the walls of the skull. So yeah, you're sort of going to get a brain injury either way. But yeah,
let's do an episode on like neurosurgery and that kind of like more technical side, like how you were talking about like sawing through the skull and that sort of thing. That's a very fascinating topic. Just wanted to, like, we talked about that seizures are caused by overexcitement of neurons. It just, for my simple brain, it just seems so obvious that when you have caffeine, like you said, the caffeine can be a trigger. Like I can feel when I have a lot of caffeine that my neurons or my brain is overexcited. And I suppose you could say the same thing about having a lot of sugar. But it does feel like a quite an intense kind of bright burning light has sort of come on. And that might be advantageous for some things, like, for example, like if you really need to study or smash something out like short term, I think that can kind of be helpful. But yeah, it makes sense to me that would be a trigger actually. Oh my God, imagine ecstasy or cocaine. Talk about neurons firing.
Yeah. And, when you have sugar and that sort of turns the lights on, that's dopamine, which is an excitatory molecule. It turns on other molecules, makes them go. And so, you get too much of that, you can have a problem. Interestingly, there's, that, and dopamine has a lot of different things, but like different, interestingly, like Parkinson's is you're not having enough dopamine. And so you can't like initiate movement. And so you just don't have enough, you don't have enough dopamine to tell these things to go. Right. And so it's harder to get going. And then schizophrenia seems to be influenced by dopamine as well, by having too much dopamine. And so the treatment for Parkinson's is trying to increase the amount of dopamine or the efficacy of dopamine in your brain, or even supplying dopamine in the form of carbidopa or levodopa, as it can be called. And so increasing that amount of dopamine to help them sort of move more. And if you get too much of that, you can actually start displaying schizophrenic experiences and having sort of psychotic breaks or hallucinations. And the flip side of that is that people with schizophrenia, they're getting medication. They're trying to dampen down that dopamine response. And so that reduces their hallucinations and experiences brought about by schizophrenia. But if they get too much of that, they actually start displaying Parkinson-like features. So it's sort of interesting. There's more going on to it than that. I don't think it's as simple as that, but that's a major contributing factor. So yeah, dopamine plays a big role in your brain. And so that's why people, try to take drugs and different things that increase dopamine, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamines, and sugar, fructose specifically. They all give a dopamine response to your brain, to the addiction centers of your brain. Your brain's like, yeah, I like that. Let's do that again. And so that's why they can be, neurochemically addictive.
Hey guys, happy to announce that we have a new sponsor, our first ever sponsor for the show, and it's the Carnivore Bar, which is a product that Anthony and I both really enjoy and totally believe in.
Yeah. So yeah, the carnivore bar is really good because it's just meat and fat. It doesn't have any of the extra nonsense. You can get it with salt, which I actually like, and you can get it with honey. Obviously, that's not what I go for, but you have it with the ones that have just pure meat and fat, and then meat, fat, and water. And so it's really good because it's portable. It's pemmican, basically. This is what the Native Americans would use when they would run a herd of buffalo off a cliff, and they would just preserve the meat that way. It's the same thing. And so this has, I think I calculated before, where it's something like 3/4 of a pound of pemmican has 2,000 calories. And so if you're hiking or backpacking or something like that, and you're worried about pack weight, 10 pounds of pemmican is 2 weeks of perfect nutrition, at 2,000 calories a day. So, it's not something that you would just eat as a meal. But because it is more expensive than just buying meat. So if you have meat, just eat meat. But this is something that's great on the go, something you can bring to work, or if you're doing I like training fasted and performing fasted. Some people like doing like ultra marathon things or Ironman things, and they want to eat halfway through. This is perfect for that. Going hiking, you're not going to bring a Tupperware container full of cut up steak, but you can bring a carnivore bar, and you can bring two, and then you're going to have perfect nutrition for your entire endeavor, and with hardly any size restrictions.
Going out for dinner and don't want to gorge on all the crapola that everybody orders, eat a carnivore bar on the way, keep it in your handbag or your pocket, and you're ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, exactly. So, if you're in a situation where you do want to eat and you don't have access to something, that it would be in keeping with what you want to eat, this is a perfect option for that. And
I think I heard about Jordan Peterson carrying steak around in his pocket. If he needed a carnivore bar, he'd have a carnivore bar in his pocket.
It's less messy. I'll cut up a steak and put it into a Tupperware thing and bring that with me. Or I've been known to cook a T-bone and just eat that in the car like a popsicle, and just have a car steak. But that's not necessarily, some people are less savage than that, and they just want to do something normal. But you can always bring a steak to work or on the go. But sometimes it's just very inconvenient. Sometimes you just want to grab something and have it ready to go. And I've certainly done that when I'm on call and I'm running out to the hospital, when I'm like, damn it, I really want to eat. I do grab one and I'll have that out the door. I did that, last night when I was on call. So it's something that's very convenient. It tastes good. It's sort of got a crunch to it that is just a nice different texture. And that's one thing that people have spoken to me about, that they really like the different textures, and they want something salty and crunchy like chips. They were talking specifically about chips, but this is salty and crunchy. It's something different, and it's enjoyable. I wouldn't just eat them like you're eating, a meal, but I absolutely have these and use these for those occasions that they are just very convenient, and they are
100%. So go and get yourself a carnivore bar.
But in the context of seizures, we do know that, again, when you eliminate carbohydrates, you are significantly benefiting your epilepsy or your seizures, and you are significantly reducing your risk for having future seizures. I was talking to Professor Ben Bickman at BYU, and he was talking about it as well. And he's been doing research on insulin and metabolism for well over 15 years. And he's a professor of biochemistry and bioenergetics, I think is the his title. But I could be mistaken there. But anyway, he's a professor at BYU and does a ton of research on this. And he was saying, we were talking about that phenomenon where if you go on a ketogenic diet, this significantly helps that. And he was saying that people on for epilepsy specifically, they actually seemed to be helped by the amount of ketones that they had, and they actually wanted higher ketones. So eating more fatty meat, that's going to bump up your ketones, and that for them was actually even more protective, that not just being in the correct metabolic state and not dumping a bunch of sugar into your brain, but having it run on ketones, which it prefers, as Ben Bickman said, like, when you're going into like a ketogenic state, or just your normal metabolism, which is called the fasting metabolism, but I disagree with that. I think that that's our primary metabolic state. That's where our body and biochemistry work much better. And when your blood sugar is sort of going down, and it's not being just stuffed into every orifice by insulin, it starts coming down, and then your ketones, or even like you have like something, I forget the exact amount, but you have something like a quarter of the amount of ketones as you do glucose. All of a sudden your brain just goes, yep, that's what I want, and it only runs on ketones. It just throws the glucose away. And so when your brain is preferentially using ketones, even when there are less ketones than glucose available, that lets you know that that's your brain's primary energy source. And even when you're in the so-called fed state, which is your carbohydrate, insulin-driven state, which I think is a pathological state, and you have constantly, chronically too high of blood sugar, and your insulin's just stuffing it into your brain and other parts of your body, even then, your brain still runs on some ketones. Your brain never doesn't run on ketones. It will always have some ketones that it runs on because it needs them. And that's what it wants to run on. So if there's any ketones available, it's using them. And then when it gets just enough ketones, it's just like, yeah, we're only using that. And it just shuts down the glucose, even when it's available. So that was very interesting to me. And specifically with epilepsy, being in a ketogenic state, preferably a carnivore state, was helpful. And then just having higher ketones seemed to be added to that. And that was a protective thing to the brain. Your brain is getting its preferred and primary energy source, and that seems to make a big difference in epilepsy.
Is that linked to? I've heard people talk about therapeutic ketones before, or therapeutic ketosis. Are you familiar with that at all?
No, I don't know what that refers to. Maybe it's something like that they've improved their life by going on a ketogenic diet and getting their ketones up. Because when you go on a ketogenic diet, a lot of people think of that as the ketones. I need my ketones up. I need my ketones up. I need to be in ketosis, and they're checking they're getting monitors and things like that. I think that if you're eating naturally, you don't need to do that. We didn't have these monitors even 20 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, but not really before that, and certainly not 100 years ago or 100,000 years ago. And so life just worked. Okay, so if you're eating what you're supposed to eat, life will just work. Yeah. And you don't need to micromanage anything. And, and that goes for ketones as well. However, from what Professor Bickman was saying, that people with epilepsy are benefited by having higher ketones, and not just being in ketosis, but having a higher level of ketones. That seems
kind of like, I was about to ask about that. Like, people with epilepsy being prescribed exogenous ketones.
Maybe, yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think that would be an interesting thing to do. So even people that they're like, yeah, I can't do carnivore, I can't do keto, maybe, taking in exogenous ketones, your brain would potentially, kick over and just start using those as well. Yeah, maybe, and I do know people that like take ketones and like, yeah, my brain just wakes up, I feel really good. But they're not on a full carnivore diet.
Yeah, that's right.
So I don't know if that would make a difference for them though. But yeah, maybe. But that'll be really interesting with someone with a standard American diet, Western diet, where they're eating carbohydrates and doing that. Would that kick over and have your brain running on that? How often would you have to eat them? How often you have to take them? Like what doses? I think that would be very interesting. And would that help with your epilepsy? That'd be very interesting. But you'd be easier, and it would be easier, and you'd be better served by just getting rid of that crap anyway, and just eating what you're supposed to eat anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's kind of one thing that we talk about all the time. It's like there are so many of these like band-aid measures that you put in place because you're doing damage at the root of things. And,
Yeah.
and that would be an example of that. So that's not ideal. But on the topic of exogenous ketones, have you taken them before?
No, I haven't taken them before. I'm a big proponent of just letting your body do its thing, and so I don't take that. I don't take supplements, I don't take vitamins, I don't take things like that.
Yeah.
I get everything I need from meat. The one thing that I do qualify that with is if I'm not getting in the sun, because I get up before, I'm at work before it's light out. I'm leaving after it's dark again. Like I'm just not getting in the damn sun. And so, I'm not going to get the vitamin D that I want to be at the levels that I, feel are most beneficial in that regard. You will get vitamin D from animal fat and, butter and things like that. But, if I'm not getting in the sun, sometimes I'll take some vitamin D3, but that's really it. And, I don't think that I'm not too worried about like what my ketone levels are, just because whatever they are, they're physiological.
Yeah.
And, and if I had epilepsy for some reason and I found that to be beneficial, great. I think if someone's doing that and they're doing carnivore already and it's not quite getting rid of all their seizures, try it, see how it goes. It may well be beneficial, and that would be very interesting, and it could be very beneficial to that person. I don't think that I need that. I think that I'm good just getting what I need from meat.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm the same with you. I feel the same, and I think taking exogenous ketones seem to be not necessary. Like, why don't you just get to the core of things? But I have taken them before, and I took some. The brand's called Prove It ketones. And first of all, it tastes really nice. It's like sort of like salty and sweet in a drink, but it's really intense. So like if you take ketones in the morning, like maybe instead of having a coffee, you go into like obviously a really deep state of ketosis fast, like faster than you would if you were just doing a little bit of fasting and eating fatty meat. You actually go a little bit quicker, and it's really intense. Like probably too intense. You feel like you can concentrate really, really well. And I know that a lot of people, I'm not recommending this, a lot of people have had success losing weight on ketones, because you take that in the morning, you take some at lunchtime, you do not need to eat. And your brain is absolutely firing. So it's basically like it's like a hack to fasting. Like I would maybe recommend it to somebody who has a lot of fat to lose and like has trouble, managing their diet. But then the idea is to get off them, not to be on them the whole time. But you could easily take ketones twice a day and then only have to eat one meal a day, and then you would lose. And if you're just eating meat for dinner, then you'd lose body fat pretty fast.
Yeah. I mean, I would worry that, if you're doing that and you're just sort of supplying this energy, and it is energy, so it's going to have calories and nutrition in that sense, but you might be losing out on the other things that meat brings you. And if you're sort of if your body's saying, oh yeah, we're good on energy, like everything's fine, you don't need to eat, are you losing out on other nutrients or things that your body would have wanted otherwise?
Totally.
Maybe because that's certainly not something we've ever supplemented with before, and that hasn't come across. We haven't come across just a natural source of ketones apart from animal fat in the wild.
A little sachet,
just ketone fat
in the bush.
Yeah, just growing off of some tree, or like like a keto fountain or something. Just ketones just pouring down, and so I'm happy just sort of just doing things physiologically and biochemically. That's interesting though. That sweet flavor, is that from artificial sweeteners or what do they have? Maybe, yeah.
Okay.
I would certainly want to avoid those anyway.
I don't recommend anyone listen to this does that. I'm just saying that's.
Well, that's just your experience. No, it's interesting though, and you're just sort of, just mainlining your brain's fuel source. That's not an unreasonable, response to that, as your brain just goes, oof.
You just hear it, and you're like,
yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, and that's the thing too. You're really just going for the source there. Like this is just energy. You're just taking in pure energy, and you're not taking in all the other things. And I think that's specifically with carnivore versus a keto diet is that difference, is that you're eliminating more things out on a carnivore diet. And I've certainly spoken to people that have had a better time with carnivore versus keto for their epilepsy. Like, they'd be like on 5 different medications and still having seizures. And then they discover keto and then they're coming off all their medications. They're maybe only like 1 or 2 now, and they're doing much better. Or maybe they're off their medications, but they still have a seizure every now and then. And so they're still on an agent for that. And then they go carnivore, and then that's it. And they haven't had a seizure since. And that's not necessarily everyone's going to have that experience, but these people certainly did. And, carbohydrates are going to screw these things up. It's going to screw up, the energy metabolism in your brain. And for some reason that kicks off epilepsy in those that are susceptible to it, or can anyway. And so eliminating that, you're just eliminating one of these triggers, but there are other triggers. And so, caffeine being one of those things. And so, if caffeine is one of those things, and hemlock is one of those things, and carbohydrates are one of those things, all of which come from plants, really, then even honey comes from plants, because that's just concentrated nectar that the bees puked up, and so that comes from a flower, really. All these things. What's that?
Heard it here first.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. Like, I don't see how it can be carnivore just because a bee takes it from a plant and then puts it in their hive. How does that suddenly make it that you're eating an animal?
Well, think about this, right? A cow eats grass and then basically pukes back the cud into their mouth, and they chew that more, and then they swallow it again, right? So if you took that cud, would that be an animal product? Is that a cow now? No, it's what the cow is eating to make a cow, right? So the bee is eating nectar to then puke up honey and have a store so that they can eat that later, and that feeds bees. And then you eat the bee. That if you wanted to eat, animal-based or carnivore, you'd eat the bee. You wouldn't eat the bee vomit. You wouldn't eat the bee food. And so, if you just sort of think about it that way, it makes more sense that that's not an animal product.
And you don't get honey. Also, you don't get honey from milking a bee. Just to be really clear, that's why dairy is slightly different, because it's like,
and you don't get almond milk from milking almonds either.
What?
Yeah, little almond nipples. So like carbohydrates, these things come from plants predominantly. Obviously, animal, meat has glycogen and certain carbohydrate stores as well. But the main sources of carbohydrates come from plants. Caffeine comes from plants. Water hemlock is obviously a plant, and I don't know what the chemical is there in there that triggers these seizures, but they're severe. And so, that is that. Are those the only 3 things in the plant world that are going to do that? Probably not. And so you're probably going to have other triggers as well in plants and vegetables. And so that is, carbohydrates are a major trigger, but there are other triggers. And so, going on a ketogenic diet does help significantly. We've known this for 90 years. But coming off these other things as well and getting rid of those triggers as well is going to help even more. And maybe you don't have, I was talking to, Nate, the bodybuilder from Reno, had him on the show a few weeks ago, or a couple of weeks ago. And he cured his epilepsy.
Oh, really? Wow. Awesome.
Yeah. And so he was seizure free just from keto. And then he, went on, a carnivore, and he got even better. I mean, he didn't have any seizures on keto, so he was already good from that standpoint. But his health benefits, his, depression, anxiety, and other things were just completely gone after he went full carnivore. And, he's breaking records in weightlifting in Nevada. And, it's not like as big of a lifting culture and competition as like California would be, but he is still breaking records in Nevada, and he's really just getting going with a carnivore weightlifting set, and he's just accelerating so much faster than other people are. So I think he's going to do very, very well if he keeps it up and keeps competing. But yeah, he got rid of his seizures, and those other people that I've spoken to, where they were on like 5 different agents and they still were having seizures. That does happen. It's rare, but it does happen. They were never told or even suggested like, hey, you're a difficult case. This is really bad. It's something that would help or could help. Just don't eat carbs and sugar. It was never suggested to them. Like, these guys have to figure it out themselves. And, and then they do, and they have good outcomes from it. try? Like, why aren't they trying? I know that some are, and I know that there are neurologists who do recommend that, but I would have thought that this would be, part of the, the canon of treating epilepsy is, is saying, hey, you can give this a try. If it doesn't work, if you can't do it and you can't maintain it, that's fine. But there's good evidence that this helps with epilepsy, and especially when you get someone who's on 5 medications or multiple medications, more than one. That's a difficult case, and that's that person's having a hard time, and they are at high risk for death, because they could have a seizure at any time, and any seizure could be fatal. Any seizure could be your last, and that's a sort of a scary thing to say. And the majority of seizures are not fatal, but you never know. You don't know, and you don't know if you just have a seizure and you just fall and you crack your head on the corner of a table, and that's it. You don't know. And so that's sort of the worrying thing about epilepsy and having seizures. And so just at least trying that or suggesting it, just say, hey, by the way, this could help. I think that it would be, I just think it should just be part of normal practice to at least suggest it and recommend it. And then the patient can do what they want. It's their body, it's their life. If they just go, yeah, having seizures is small change compared to giving up pizza. Fine. That's your decision. But, a lot of people would give it a shot. A lot of people do not like the fact that they have seizures, do not like the fact that they have to take medications. They don't.
I mean,
and so
I'm sort of thinking about like a doctor who might be hesitant to suggest, hey, go on a ketogenic diet, it's going to help with your epilepsy. I'm guessing the ones that are hesitant would be either the ones that aren't sort of don't care very much. So they're happy to just prescribe the standard remedy, put them to the side. There'd probably be some who would say, oh no, I can't go ahead and encourage you to consume a lot of saturated fat and not eat your veggies. I just don't feel morally comfortable with that. To that sort of response, which I assume is what they would say, I say, oh, but you do feel comfortable recommending these prescription drugs and chemicals that they could be on for the rest of their life, that they have to pay for the rest of their life as well, that are made in like a laboratory on the other side of the world. So you do feel comfortable with that, but you don't feel comfortable asking them to eat a whole food diet of meat and fat, which we've been eating for thousands of years, even for 3 months as a trial to see if they have another epileptic episode.
Yeah. I think some people are, do have a lot of empathy for their patients, but, maybe they just, in their experience, it's difficult to get them on it. And the modality in medicine right now is, and the incentives are such that you're trying to find a product that will, help people, but that you can also sell, because that's where people are getting returns, right? It's just like you're trying to have a business and you're like, okay, what can I do that can help people? What product can I make that can help this person? Oh, okay, I figured out this medication and it can suppress seizures. Well, that's a great product, and you're helping people. Telling people not to eat carbs doesn't sell a product. And so that incentive is just a little different. And so that's why it needs to come from doctors, and it needs to come from, other sort of health advisors, because that is your product. Your advice is your product, so you're giving people proper advice. So that's where it needs to come from. But unfortunately, in the medical community, we get taught by people that have these incentives that like Harvard, there was a study that came out, or an article that came out, that was talking about how basically, their professors that were teaching, they were very much in the pockets of these pharmaceutical companies. And like someone in like first year medical student at Harvard, asked about the side effects of statins, like, and the guy like openly mocked her in class, and he's like, oh my God, basically like, oh, you're just being crazy. Like there are no side effects. This is just perfect. It's only good, only roses. And, they sort of, thought that was a bit, uncalled for, looked it up. This guy is like, on the board of like, all these companies that make statins, and like, and it has like, ties with like 32 different pharmaceutical companies, and, financial ties with them. And so, and then they found that there was a grading system that basically looks at, how financially compromised and ethically compromised are your professors in your medical school with the pharmaceutical companies. How much of these people have all these ties that they aren't reporting, they aren't telling people about, and you can find it somewhere. It has to be reported at some point, but basically Harvard had a grade of F, so they had a failing grade of their financial ties of their professors with the pharmaceutical companies. So, these are the people teaching doctors, and yep, this is the treatment. You have epilepsy, this is how you start with. I was never told about a ketogenic diet helping epilepsy when I was in medical school, and we were learning about this. We learned about the different classifications of drugs and what they did and how they worked pharmacologically and physiologically in your body, because that's what you're tested on in USMLE. Step 1, you're looking at physiology, you're looking at pharmacology, and that's just what you're getting taught. They don't tell you that for 90 years, you haven't needed medication except in very extreme circumstances. And so, that's unfortunately how medicine is taught. You're taught that you have a problem, you have a treatment, and that treatment is a product. You know what I mean? And then there's diet and lifestyle, lose weight, blah, blah, blah. But the recommendations also go back to these influences from industry, like the sugar companies paying off all these professors, like Ansel Keys, like these guys from Harvard who became the head of USDA, who then put forward the policies. So even those recommendations are compromised from these payoffs and these unethical actors. So, it's difficult, but that's what people are trying. They're like, oh yeah, here are these recommendations, but they're also contaminated. But a lot of these things, you're taught to prescribe medications, and that's what it is.
It's like asking a stockbroker, should I buy this stock? They'll either say, absolutely buy it through me, or no, actually buy this stock through me, or invest in this little fund through me, where they get a slightly larger commission. And the farmers get the same thing when they have an agronomist come out to their farm and they're like, does my topsoil need more fertilizer? Do I need more pesticides? Yeah, absolutely. Like people in this local area usually purchase
why not?
Suite of products.
Yeah, I've got some in my truck. What a coincidence.
Tap here.
So unfortunately there are incentives, but I don't know if it certainly wasn't taught to me, and obviously I'm not a neurologist, so I don't know if that's regularly trained in neurology residency. But I certainly have spoken to a lot of people that had no idea that's what it is, neurologists, and other ones who did, but they just sort of dismissed it by like, oh yeah, but it's really hard to do that. So maybe it was relayed to them, that like, yeah, this is something that works, but it's really hard to make people change their life and drop carbs. So they've just basically had that mindset without even trying it, that they're like, oh yeah, well, that was told to me by someone I respect and admire. So like, obviously that's true. So there's no worse, it's not worth wasting your time. But I think it is worth it. I think that, maybe not everyone's going to get on board, but some will, and it will help those people. And certainly every person that I've spoken to that's having problems with seizures, that I run into in my neurosurgical consults, they're absolutely thrilled to hear about something that could potentially get them off medication and help them not have seizures, and can get them driving again and not have to worry about, locking up and killing themselves and others. They're very excited to hear that, and so, I don't think that that's as difficult of a hurdle to get over as some may think. And then I think the others just unfortunately just don't know about it, and because we're taught pharmacology, and we're not taught prescriptive nutritional advice, except for don't eat fat, don't eat meat, vegetables are good, and so that's as deep as it gets to the nutritional sciences in medicine, in medical school, and it's wrong, so it's like very not helpful.
All right, that was really well said. Thanks for ending there. I think I'll turn that into a clip, and if you've got somebody who I do personally, if you know someone who's got epilepsy, maybe send that clip to them and they can hopefully ask more questions or do a bit more research themselves.
Well, and there's plenty of studies out there. I mean, literally like a century's worth.
So are there any names we should be looking for? Like, should I be looking at Ben Bickman, paper?
Well, yeah, I mean, Ben Bickman's a great place to start. And, you know, he's sort of the guy doing research into, carbs and insulin and how this affects your brain and body. And, he's been doing this for over 15 years, and even migraines as well. I was talking to him sort of off the camera as soon as the camera ended. And I was just like, oh, why didn't we get this? But, he was saying that, migraines, another neurological disorder, is very well treated by being on a ketogenic diet. And again, carnivore diet is going to be even better than that, because there are known triggers for migraines that are not carbohydrate related, but they do come from plants. And so, just doing that is going to be better. Sorry?
Like seed oil?
Caffeine. Well, yeah, wow, maybe, I don't know. But like caffeine, caffeine can absolutely, trigger these things, and dehydration, just simple things, can set these things off. But, but as far as ketogenic sort of thing, she's like, oh yeah, being on a ketogenic diet is absolutely helpful. There were studies back in the 1920s, as far back as the 1920s, that he was telling me about, that had like, 90% of people with migraines that went on a ketogenic diet stopped their migraines completely. And the other 10% still had a significant reduction in number and severity of their migraines. So it just helps. And so probably that 10% were people who were being triggered by other things in plants, not carbohydrate related. So, and he was saying specifically there, now they just need to sort of be off carbohydrates and in a ketogenic state. They don't even need like the high ketones. Like, that is more important for people with epilepsy to have high ketones. With people with migraines, it's just get away from carbs and be in a ketogenic state predominantly. When you eat meat and you eat a amount of protein, your blood sugar will blip up a bit, and you'll, technically drop out of ketosis transiently. But, overall, this is still part of a physiological process. But yeah, so as long as you're not taking in exogenous carbohydrates for migraines, you're good. With people with epilepsy, that's good, but also having higher ketones seems to be beneficial as well. And so, yeah, I mean, you can just jump in the literature. I mean, just go on Google Scholar. Everyone has access to that. If you have access to PubMed, even better. But just Google Scholar will at least bring up things with abstracts, and you can just look up, ketogenic diet and epilepsy, or ketogenic diet, epilepsy, Johns Hopkins. Like, things will come up, and you can do your own research. And like you said, if people know someone with epilepsy or seizures, please share this video with them. This is something that will help them. And, if it's something that they can do and they can get on board with, it will change their life, and it will significantly benefit them from a seizure perspective. And then you'll get all the other benefits as well. It will heal your body and have your body working optimally in every other aspect as well. And it will help their seizures. So it's only a win-win. There are no drawbacks to this, realistically, apart from like, oh, but I like eating carbs or whatever. That's the same argument as like, it's like, oh, you're having health problems, you should really stop doing drugs and alcohol. Yeah, but I like drugs and alcohol. Absolutely. I like smoking. Yeah. Fine. I appreciate that you like that. And if you're an adult, you get to make your own decisions. I'm fully on board with that. I'm very libertarian when it comes to people making their own decisions with their own bodies. But I think a lot of people will look at that and go like, I can get off medication, potentially I can have less seizures. Like, I'm going to give that a try, and it will help them. Like, even the people that it may not cure completely, it's going to help. It's going to significantly reduce your burden of seizures, and it's going to reduce your reliance on medications as well. And I think that's always a good thing.
100%. All right, Anthony, thank you so much. That was really, really, really good.
Yeah, not a problem, man.
All right, see you guys.